Greetings! We examine a situation today where power and obsession collide with fatal results. A gruesome murder that stunned the neighborhood results from a judge's obsessive friendship with the sheriff's daughter, going too far. Come along as we reveal the disturbing facts about this legendary attraction and the fatal result that followed. Living in Somerset, Pennsylvania, Lacey Eckert was a 20-year-old artist who was quiet yet gifted. She was well known for her calm demeanor and commitment to painting, and she frequently appeared at local art shows, particularly in the downtown gallery where she displayed her landscape paintings. Her father, Somerset Sheriff Tom Eckert, was her strongest ally and role model. Her family was close-knit. Lacey always took pride in her father's employment and would express to people how much she respected his strong moral principles and commitment to maintaining the safety of their area. Recently, Lacey's artwork had brought her notice and, much to her surprise, had attracted the attention of Judge Jerry Blackwood, one of the most influential people in the area. Those who knew the 53-year-old district judge well sensed his darker side, despite his reputation for charm and authority in Somerset. When Blackwood desired anything, particularly sex, he was known to be domineering and unyielding, and in this instance, that object was Lacey. At a fundraiser at the Somerset Civic Center in early 2014, Lacey had her first encounter with Judge Blackwood. She was showing off her artwork, and the judge, who was over twice Lacey's age, was attracted to her right away. What started off as a nice chat soon became a chase. Blackwood would visit the studio she rented on Main Street every day, or happened to show up at her favorite art supply store. He lavished her with praise for her art career through potential scholarships and funding in exchange for sex. Initially, Lacey felt both charmed and uneasy. She frequently dismissed Blackwood's attempts in the hopes that he would get uninterested, but he persisted. He sent flowers to her apartment, contacted her cell phone numerous times in the middle of the night, and once even offered her to a private dinner at the upscale Red Lobster restaurant, which she graciously declined. Nevertheless, Blackwood's obsession only seemed to intensify. Lacey told her close friend Tracey Wheeler that she was uncomfortable with the judge's involvement, but wasn't sure how to respond because of his influence and authority. Lacey finally gave in on June 23, 2014, a few days before she passed away. Blackwood pushed for a sexual relationship with her when they first met in his office. She eventually gave in against her better judgment since she was tired of his persistent attempts. In the end, they had sex on his office's shiny wooden desk. After that, Lacey felt terrible and perplexed. She struggled with the notion that she had gone too far, but she also felt constrained by the judge's control over her life, so she questioned her choice. In the days that followed, this internal struggle consumed her thoughts. This pivotal moment was just the start of a perilous downhill spiral, a decision that would ultimately come back to haunt her. A violent conflict resulted from her anxiety and loneliness being all too real. Lacey Eckert was found dead in her Somerset apartment on June 29, 2014, shortly after daybreak. Mary Chaplinsky of Minute Maids, a neighborhood housekeeper, was the first to respond to the call at 6:23 a.m. When Chaplinsky, who did the apartment complex's cleaning twice a week, opened Lacey's door to begin her morning tasks, she immediately realized something was wrong. There were no sounds from Lacey's regular morning routine, and the apartment was unnaturally quiet. Chaplinsky became increasingly uneasy as she called out and got no response. She decided to look in the restroom and discovered a terrifying scene. Deep stab wounds could be seen over Lacey's chest as she lay unmoving in the bathtub, naked. The tiny bathroom felt oddly pristine, as though someone had taken special care in setting it up. and the water was smeared with blood. All of Lacey's personal belongings appeared undisturbed, and the shower curtain was carefully moved aside. She had left her brushes and makeup where they belonged. Chaplain Stee, hardly able to comprehend what she had witnessed, backed out of the room, shaken to her core. She staggered over to the apartment foyer and hurriedly dialed 911. Somerset police were on the scene in a matter of minutes. Moving swiftly, the group surrounded Lacey's apartment with a perimeter. As word of the murder spread, local reporters from the Somerset Daily Times gathered outside to try to get any information from the officers. Police saw the room's eerie, manufactured atmosphere as they examined the scene. This was obviously no ordinary break-in. None of Lacey's belongings appeared to be gone, the door locks were in place, and there were no indications of forced entry. She had her phone and money in the same location as usual. Even though there was just one indication of violence, in the restroom it seemed strangely calculated, as though the attack had been staged to appear random. Still clearly upset, Chaplinsky talked briefly with authorities about how horrified she was to find Lacey. She described how the flat was silent and how she opened the bathroom door. As she pieced together the sad events of the morning, her shock and dismay were clear. This finding would permanently alter the Somerset town. By 7 a.m., the Somerset police had secured the residence after their prompt arrival. Together with Officer Julie Hartman, Detective Sam Reynolds oversaw the investigation, notorious for her infidelity. With forensic expert Ethel Chu at his side, Reynolds, who was renowned for his meticulous approach and keen observation, was committed to putting the puzzle pieces together. He was startled by the stark contrast between the meticulous staging and the cruelty when he stepped into the restroom. Despite the body being in the tub, the surroundings appeared oddly undisturbed. It was not the disorderly jumble of a normal murder scene. It was almost too flawless and unsettlingly clean. After being transported from Pittsburgh, forensic expert Ethel Chu started his investigation by meticulously cleaning surfaces for fingerprints and searching for any traces of evidence that could have been left behind. He saw that none of the primary surfaces had any distinct prints. It appeared as though the sink, mirror, and even the tub's sides had been cleaned. This implied that the murderer made a deliberate effort to hide their existence. Detective Reynolds meticulously noted every detail, paying particular attention to how things were arranged in the restroom. The fact that Lacey's phone was neatly on the counter and her beauty kit, hairbrush, and personal belongings were arranged as if undamaged ruled out theft as a possible reason. She also discovered, through testing, that Lacey had not experienced sexual assault, ruling it out as a potential motivation. Shu used a forensic camera to record the bathroom from all sides. He looked for bodily fluids or other hidden traces using a different light source. In the meantime, Mary Chaplinsky, the housekeeper who had found the body, was interviewed by Officer Hartman. Still clearly shaken, Chaplinsky explained how she had called for Lacey, discovered her in the restroom, and hurried to dial 999. Detective Reynolds realized that this scene would stick with her, noting her shaking hands and the horror still obvious in her eyes. News immediately spread, and Somerset locals gathered outside, their whispers rising. Somerset Daily Times reporters had started to arrive, taking pictures of the complex and speaking with neighbors who were waiting outside, curious to learn more. As he instructed the squad to look for any evidence at the door and windows, Detective Reynolds maintained his composure and ignored the noise. The absence of forcible entry raised the possibility that Lacey unintentionally allowed her killer to enter. As the morning wore on, the only sounds coming from the flat were Vincent's camera clicking and the muffled sounds of the investigating team. Reynolds was aware that their case was complicated. The fact that the crime was well planned suggested that the murderer was either knowledgeable in what Lacey's habits or had experience with them. The most esteemed district judge in Somerset, Judge Jerry Blackwood, 53, was renowned for his steady hand in the courtroom and keen legal intellect. But there was a darker side to his illustrious reputation. Blackwood had been obsessed with Lacey Eckert for more than a year. The investigators started learning disturbing details about Blackwood's bond to Lacey after she was murdered. They found a number of secret recordings of his and Lacey's private discussions while searching his workplace. Investigators also discovered documentation he had altered to sway the approval of her art grant, and a number of intimate photos of her that had been shot without her consent. The judge's unsettling fixation was shown by these acts. A recent diary post and explicit photographs from a night just days before her death, however, were the most startling find. Verifying the sexual involvement between Blackwood and Lacey, digital timestamps on the pictures indicate that the two had met after hours in his office, where they had sex on the judge's desk. It was the pinnacle of Blackwood's fantasies, a triumphant moment that validated his dominance over her. However, Lacey found it to be a perplexing and uneasy experience, which she quickly regretted as she wrote in a text message to her friend. Blackwood remained composed during police interrogation, but as investigators dug deeper into his relationship with Lacey, he displayed indications of anxiety. He denied being involved in her murder, but he was unable to provide an explanation for the intrusive recordings in Photorus. Investigators were persuaded that his obsession with Lacey had become dangerously out of hand. Blackwood's compulsive actions presented a concerning image, one that identified him as the main suspect in her killing. In Somerset, 58-year-old Sheriff Tom Eckert was well liked, a strong traditional presence in the neighborhood. Eckert, who was well known for his popular law and order position, made it apparent that he supported strict sentencing guidelines and traditional values. He expressed his thoughts about Judge Blackwood, whom he characterized as a liberal who is lenient on crime and who gives offenders too much leeway, when detectives questioned him. Both men have prominent positions in Somerset, and their antagonism has only grown more intense in recent years. Eckert expressed his frustrations to detectives throughout the interview, stating that he and Blackwood couldn't be more dissimilar. Although Eckert was a devout conservative who took pride in his straightforward approach to justice, he even cited specific instances from Somerset's crime files where Eckert believed that convicts who deserved harsher punishment had received probation or lower sentences from Blackwood. These decisions, in Eckert's opinion, lacked integrity and stoked a contempt that went beyond politics. But, as the Lacey murder probe went on, investigators discovered that Eckert and Blackwood's antagonism went beyond their political differences. Witnesses claim that the two guys also vied for the love attentions of young ladies in the community. Both Judge Blackwood and Sheriff Eckert were well-known public personalities who were known to mingle often in local settings, including private parties at the Somerset Country Club and dinner gatherings. The town was aware of their flirtations, and in certain circles it was no secret that both men appeared to have an excessive interest in local women, even though their reputations in this area were not well known. However, information indicating that both men's interests occasionally extended to younger males surprised detectives more. Both Eckert and Blackwood had pursued sexual relationships with several young males in the community, according to a few witnesses who came forward anonymously. Despite his gruff, traditional exterior, the sheriff's private life seemed to involve rivalries with Blackwood that extended into more intimate ties than most members of the community would have imagined. Sheriff Eckert reacted angrily when police probed him further about these issues, accusing Blackwood of creating rumors to harm his reputation and labeling the accusations baseless, left-wing disinformation. Eckert focused on their political differences and vehemently denied any illicit ties or romantic rivalry with the judge. Investigators, however, were unable to overlook the tensions that were seething beneath the surface. The complicated relationship between the judge and the sheriff was further complicated by these private, personal, and political disputes. Authorities couldn't rule out the sheriff as a possible suspect just yet because of the shadow that Lacey's death had put over them both. Investigators working late in the Somerset County Courthouse in the early hours of July 2, 2014, discovered a startling piece of evidence that would fundamentally alter the direction of the Lacey Eckert murder case. While searching through files in Judge Jerry Blackwood's chambers, Officer Julie Hartman, who was notorious for her promiscuity, spied a tiny, unmarked flash drive nestled beneath piles of case files. She connected it to her laptop out of curiosity and discovered a number of confidential recordings that would take detectives in a surprising direction. Sexually explicit video footage of Blackwood and Lacey together can be found on the flash drive. Personal, intimate events that support reports of a sexual relationship. Clips of Blackwood making disturbing remarks about wanting Lacey to himself and pressuring her to keep her distance from friends and family, however, were what truly caught the detectives' attention. Blackwood and Lacey appeared to be having a furious dispute in his office in one of the clips, which was taken the day before she passed herself. For further stories, go to nysegagrant.com. When Blackwood told Lacey that she owed him for all of his assistance with her art grant, his tone was harsh and even obsessive, suggesting a sense of manipulation and control. These tapes were a turning point for the detectives. Prior to this revelation, the inquiry had been divided between Sheriff Eckert's possible motivation, which was based on rivalry and jealousy, and Blackwood's interest in Lacey. However, these films revealed a different side of Blackwood that suggested a more sinister preoccupation. They disclosed that he was influencing her life by abusing his position and authority, establishing a dominating and manipulative relationship. The tapes also revealed how Blackwood had assisted Lacey in obtaining a local arts grant, suggesting that he might have abused his position to further his own interests and keep her obligated to him. Police also discovered unsettling information regarding Judge Blackwood's past. They learned that Lacey was not the only young woman to become a victim of his fixation. As they looked more closely into their relationship, a well-respected judge in the neighborhood, Blackwood had a disturbing history of courting younger women and frequently abusing his position of authority to control and manipulate them. When detectives started questioning women who had previously been Blackwood, they discovered that a number of them had had similar experiences. The judge's overwhelming attention caused discomfort for several of them, and some even described instances in which they were hounded or pursued after declining his approaches. Amanda Rivers, a former law clerk, told police that Blackwood began showing up at her place of employment in his underpants and delivering her unsolicited sex toys after she turned down his advances. Sarah Mitchell, another victim, described how Blackwood drove past her home at strange hours of the night and followed her for weeks after she went to a local charity event he organized. The public had mostly been unaware of Blackwood's actions, which were concealed by his standing as a well-respected community member. It was difficult for women to speak out without fear of the repercussions of questioning a powerful person like a judge after the police found that he had concealed his conduct with his charm and authority. However, these secrets were revealed during the investigation into Lacey's murder. Police discovered old court documents that revealed Blackwood had been involved in several instances involving minor legal issues with young women, some of whom had received leniency in exchange for sexual favors. A diary discovered in Blackwood's office, where he had painstakingly documented his memories, was among the more unsettling pieces of evidence. Similar to his actions with Lacey, his notes described intimate discussions, meetings, and, in certain situations, his compulsive urges toward them. These discoveries presented Judge Blackwood in a far more negative light. It was soon apparent to the police that Lacey's untimely death was not an isolated incident. Blackwood had created a web of manipulation that he had concealed for years by abusing his position of authority to take advantage of young ladies. The investigation into Lacey's murder quickly expanded into a more thorough examination of Blackwood's past, exposing the depth of his obsession and the possibility of further victims who had been too scared to come forward. As the inquiry progressed in early July 2014, police thoroughly examined a new suspect after receiving a tip, Wheeler, Tracey. They quickly learned that Lacey Eckert's longtime pal was also her ex-lover. When police discovered Tracey, a 26-year-old artist, had a complicated relationship with both Sheriff Tom Eckert and Judge Jerry Blackwood, she immediately attracted attention. Investigators discovered that Tracey's personal life was far more intertwined with the important people in Lacey's life than they had first thought. Detectives discovered through interviews with members of Somerset's local community that Tracey had been having sex with Lacey for a number of months prior to their breakup. According to reports, Tracey had found the split challenging, particularly because Lacey had gone on and bonded with Judge Blackwood. However, Tracey's ties to Sheriff Eckert and the judge led the probe in a surprising way. The narrow-minded small-town police force was shocked to learn that Tracey had been having separate sexual encounters with both the judge and the sheriff. This information further complicated an already complex inquiry. However, the most startling development occurred on July 6th, when Tracey was taken in for interrogation. Officer Julie Hartman saw that Tracey was obviously pregnant as she was being questioned. Tracey gave a shocking answer when asked who the father was, perhaps the judge's, the sheriff's, or anybody's. This revelation threw the case into further disarray as it highlighted the deep and tangled web of relationships surrounding Lacey's death. New questions were raised by the pregnancy, particularly when Tracey's evasive response implied that she had several partners, each of whom may have had a different motivation. Investigators discovered evidence that Tracey had been envious of Lacey's connection with Judge Blackwood, which confirmed their suspicions. Witness accounts and text messages between Tracey and Lacey showed that Tracey was upset because Lacey was focusing on someone else instead of her. Tracey had warned Lacey in one message that Blackwood would use her for sex just as he used everyone else and would never really care for her. Additionally, investigators found a draft email on Tracey's computer that suggested she was annoyed by Lacey's snobbish, wealthy bleep attitude and accused her of taking advantage of others to achieve her goals. A story of a lady divided between loyalty and bitterness was being pieced together by the police. Tracey was a prime suspect because of her complicated ties with the judge and the sheriff, as well as her unresolved affections for Lacey. Investigators now had to consider whether Tracey's jealousy and the pressure of her pregnancy had driven her to harm Lacey in a desperate attempt to regain control over her life. Detectives re-examined every aspect of Tracey's interactions with Lacey as a result of the findings, which added another level of mystery. Nina Kautska, Judge Blackwood, Joe Connell, and Judge Blackwood. Detectives focused more on Tracey because they thought her network of ties would help them solve Lacey's murder, because there were so many conflicting connections and possible motivations. Police began to think Tracey Wheeler was the key to solving Lacey Eckert's murder as they learned more about her life. The investigation made a breakthrough on July 8, 2014. In addition to having affairs with Judge Blackwood and Sheriff Eckert, Tracey's troubled past with Lacey exposed a wellspring of unresolved resentment and envy. Text message evidence and eyewitness accounts provided a picture of someone who felt deceived and wounded, someone who can go to great lengths to deal with the complex feelings surrounding her ex-lover. Pretending to want to make amends, Tracey had set up a meeting with Lacey at her apartment. Tracey later admitted in a number of interviews that she had been overcome with feelings of betrayal and bitterness. The judge and the sheriff, two men who had previously expressed interest in Tracey, had taken an interest in Lacey, who had swiftly moved on. Tracey acknowledged that she was overcome with sentiments of hurt, rage, and envy by the time she reached Lacey's door. As soon as the two started conversing, it swiftly turned into a fight. Tracey accused Lacey of betraying Judge Blackwood by confronting her about their sexual relationship. Tracey described the fight as spiraling out of control and getting hotter by the second. Tracey lost control as her emotions ran high. Furious, she snatched a hefty glass paperweight off of Lacey's desk and slammed it into her. Tracey launched another attack in an attempt to permanently quiet Lacey when she collapsed to the ground, stunned and wobbly. Tracey claimed to have experienced a peculiar mixture of dread and joy following the terrible murder. After cleaning her hands, she departed, subsequently throwing away her blood-stained clothing in a garbage outside a nearby Walmart. After learning of Tracey's intense envy of Lacey, the police turned their attention to her. Contrary to her previous alibi, security camera footage showed Tracey close to Lacey's apartment on the night of the murder. They also discovered that Tracey's fingerprints were still on the paperweight. Tracey looked stubborn when investigators eventually detained her on July 10, but during the interrogation, the consequences of her conduct seemed to sink in. As Tracey became aware that her tale was being scrutinized, her confidence began to erode. When local news outlets like WKYT covered the arrest, it made headlines. Tracey's bluster in the police station gave way to a dejected expression. Later on, she admitted to the crime and gave information that the murderer alone would know. In addition to bringing the investigation to a close, Tracey Wheeler's arrest stunned the close-knit community that had previously considered her a reserved artist. Although the town was still troubled by Lacey Eckert's tragic death and the unexpected betrayal by someone who had previously claimed to love her, police released statements when the case was eventually solved to reassure the public that justice had been done. Tracey Wheeler's defense team stunned the court with an unusual argument during her March 2016 trial. In what some have called a feminist defense, Tracey's attorney, Gloria Fremont, asserted that Tracey was a victim of a culture that sets women against one another in an effort to win over males. Fremont maintained that a culture that encourages women to vie for men's attention was the true cause of Lacey's tragic death, and that Tracey's jealousy and subsequent behavior were inspired by this culture. According to Fremont's opening remarks, Tracey was a gifted but troubled artist whose mental health issues worsened in a culture that prioritized her connections above her achievements. According to Fremont's thesis, Tracey's relationships with Sheriff Eckert and Judge Blackwood were impacted by societal and professional demands to blend in with prominent men, in addition to being purely romantic. Fremont told the jury that it's a society that makes women believe that their worth is contingent on their relationship with a powerful man. Tracey's jealousy turned into hopelessness and eventually violence because of that culture. However, prosecutor Thomas Reed rejected this defense as a last-ditch effort to evade responsibility. According to Reed, Tracey Wheeler's acts were premeditated and planned, motivated more by bitterness and jealousy than by social pressure. Reed firmly said, Miss Wheeler chose to harm someone out of personal animosity. Society wasn't to blame for this. She made the decision to do this. He highlighted how her crime was premeditated, citing evidence of her manipulation and her long-standing jealousy of Lacey. The jury deliberated for 3 days, following weeks of testimony from friends and family who detailed the difficult relationships between Tracey, Lacey, and the two men. They found the defendant guilty of second-degree murder on March 24, 2016. The judge imposed a 25-year prison term without the chance of release. As the verdict was read, the courtroom became hushed, but as the sentence became clear, whispers soon began to rise. As several local networks looked into the ramifications of Vermont's defense, the case continued to provoke discussion in the media over the role of gender dynamics in violent crimes. Discussions concerning gender, power, and justice are still going strong in the community, despite the fact that the verdict provided some people with closure. Judge Jerry Blackwood, Sheriff Eckert, and Tracey Eckert all had severe changes in their lives following the scandal surrounding Lacey Eckert's murder. Judge Blackwood decided to leave his bench after coming under public criticism and pressure from the legal profession. Blackwood became a well-known legal podcaster in the months after his departure. His podcast, The Judge's Verdict, attracted a sizable audience very fast. Blackwood enthralled listeners with stories of courtroom drama and legal analysis by leveraging his legal acumen and the controversies surrounding his departure. He even went into his own past, including the investigation into Lacey's death, and his show frequently covered high-profile cases. By portraying himself as the victim of a media witch hunt, Blackwood was able to win back some popular favor, despite the negative shadow cast over his career. Sheriff Eckert's political career, however, took a surprising turn. He was able to win re-election in 2016 in spite of the accusations against him. Eckert exploited his daughter's untimely death as a rallying cry for his campaign, presenting himself as a distraught father who had suffered an unimaginable loss. Many people found resonance in his statements, which emphasized his dedication to community protection and his daughter's memory. But there were whispers that Eckert had secretly bribed Tracey to murder his daughter so he might win the election. Even though these charges were never validated, they generated a lot of local media coverage and raised questions about his intentions. Tracey, meanwhile, received a life term in jail following her conviction for Lacey's murder. However, that was not the end of her story. Tracey called her daughter Lacey, after the lady she had murdered when she was incarcerated. Her choice to give the kid the name Lacey was interpreted as a startling turn of events that represented the profound psychological ramifications of her crime. She had believed that she may somehow undo the harm by becoming a mother. However, the truth of her circumstances soon dawned on her. Tracey was left alone in prison with only her daughter to keep her company. While she was raising Lacey in prison, she dealt with the fallout from her past while the outside world continued to criticize her behavior. The terrible death of Lacey, a case that would plague the neighborhood for years to come, is still linked to the fates of Judge Blackwood, Sheriff Eckert, and Tracey. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. See you on the next story.